Hold it, we're going. Okay.
Okay, the first farm that they purchased was down in Mequon, Illinois. The reason they went down there is because the ground was so high around Galesburg they couldn't afford it, and they were coming out of the Depression. And I think it was like 1940 or something.
Yeah,
like
and
that.
if somebody wanted to know the exact date, they
Yeah.
could go to the courthouse and get.
Right. And so they were able to get, there was a very nice 80 down there, and they were able to buy it with the money that they had saved from egg money and from milk money. And it was the first ground that they became ours in ownership after having lost
it all
during
The Depression.
But the whole time they owned that Mequon farm, they still lived on the Craig farm?
Yes.
Okay. And so were they farming that Mequon farm, or they just...
No,
they
they
never
rented it
So,
out.
so they never farmed it until you started farming.
Right.
You were the first Malley to actually farm it.
Yes.
It was the fail-safe that when everything, after
Right.
you've been through a depression,
They wanted...
then they knew the bottom was going to fall out again, and it was the fail-safe. We'll always have the Mequon farm. We'll be able to go there
right.
and
It
live.
had a house on
It
it.
had a
Right.
house.
And the house used to be an old stagecoach farm.
Well, the house couldn't have been great when they bought it.
No.
Otherwise, it would have brought more money.
Right.
And that house was still around when I was born in 1976. So it had to be a real piece of junk.
Oh, it was bad.
Like, yeah.
But it had been a really uptown house at one time. That's why those doorknobs that are in your house that came out of that old stagecoach stop are such nice. You know, they were ornate. They were from a well-to-do place at one time. It was just really, really old.
So the next one they bought was the O'Brien farm, and that would have been in the early 60s probably.
53, I think.
Okay, all right.
And my father and his brother-in-law, who was married to Dad's sister.
So this is what it'd be
Isabel
Isabel
and Rusty.
and Rusty, and then Bud and Helen.
And they bought the farm. They both contributed it into it. They both owned the farm. It was the Malley and Denny. And then after that, I think it was in 60.
That's where that number comes from.
About 64, Dad bought the Grady farm.
Yeah, that's the one I have the check for.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, let's see, we had a rich neighbor, and he always wanted to buy this farm. And Dad just happened to go in and see Leona Grady. Her husband has passed away. And about 7 or 8 months before. And he went in and he said, Leona, are you interested in selling it? And she said, yes. And she says, but Bob Thompson wants it too. And Dad says, well, I can give you so much money, a certain amount. I think it was $700 an acre at that. And that was as
that's a lot. Yeah.
as any grounds was around at that time. And she says, Bud, I think Thompson is just going to stick in a hired hand into my house here. And she loved this house.
It was they built this house.
Yeah, this is the house that we are filming in right now.
Right.
Yes, and it was her home that had been built by she and her husband.
And she said, that's a good enough offer. She said, I'm going to sell it to you.
Let's just do it right now.
Yeah. So then that's where we ended up with this one. And then...
Yeah, hang on, because I got one quick question about the O'Brien before we get away from it, because the way I understand it, Grandpa, William Henry Malley, when he bought it, just wanted the flat part of the land.
No.
Because he didn't get that pasture. Wasn't that tacked on after the sale?
No, that was, immediately, the same day.
Right, the same day. But it seems to me like he did not go to the sale wanting to get 130 acres. He went to the sale wanting to get 108, yeah.
Yeah, that could be, but the other part of it only brought $80 an acre.
Right, so he just had to get it because it was 40 acres at $80 an acre.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, we just got to have that too, I guess. It was landlocked anyway. Maybe not necessarily landlocked, but
the other piece was
pretty close.
There was an easement to get to part of it.
Right.
And so by him buying the other part of it.
Then he doesn't have to deal with the easement,
easement,
and somebody
okay.
going through his ground to get back there to it. He
Right.
just had it all. Yeah, which makes sense.
Yeah. So that's how that came about.
Okay, so
And
you were.
then,
Go ahead.
Then the next one that they bought was the 100 acres. And the 100 acres plus the 78 acres were Isabel's, the one we call Isabel Farm. They both sold together.
So Grandpa got the 100 acres, and Denny got
Got the
Isabel's.
78 acres. And then Denny sold the house off.
Mm-hmm. Did he sell it off immediately, or did they live in it for a while?
No, they sold it off within a year.
Yeah, gotcha.
And that ground also brought $700 an acre, all of it.
What year?
North and south the tracks, and it would be about probably 5 years after, it'd be
Right,
almost 70.
I was going to say 68, 69.
And think about how good times must have been from 1965 to 1970.
And
If he could buy 100 acres and within 5 years have enough cash to go and buy another 100
Plus
acres.
the land had
He never
inflated.
borrowed any money from any bank.
Right.
Now they would borrow money from each other.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Brothers and sisters and stuff
Right.
like that.
But the land did
but-
not inflate in that 8 to 10 years.
But they talk about those being good times for farming because
Glory.
he made enough money farming just a little bit of land to well just think of it this way. He was well, I don't know how much he was farming, but he only owned 180 acres, and he was able to come up with enough cash in 5 years to buy another 100 acres.
Yeah.
So
he was renting ground. The original Malley farm, the Craig farm, he was renting that too.
So he was renting both sides of the tracks there.
Yes.
Yes.
And he was also renting the farm up on the hard road. It was called Old Pat's farm, and Old Pat was a distant relation, and it is the farm is Gustafson is farming there in the corner now, right? It would be cattywampus of the Denizar farm.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. It's like Murdoch now or something. Murtaugh or Murdoch. Yeah.
Murdoch. Then, right. It was what was it? I can't think of Pat's for us, but old Pat, and his sister lived in there was a house there too, and it was really an old house. So then they had there is another little bit of thing about that. At old Pat's farm, we used to have hogs that would, it had some old barns and stuff. And I would get leather and halters out of it for my 4-H calves. But one day, Grandpa got a call about 3 in the morning, and the neighbor, Carl Munson, called, and he says, "Bud, there's something going on with your hogs up at the shed. They're all squealing and raising hell." And so Dad went up, and as he was thinking about, well, I better take my gun, and he had a single shot 22, which young Bud is
using.
Oh, it's that same gun. Okay.
He took that gun and he went in, and he pulled into the yard, and he climbed over the fence, and there was two dead hogs in the lot. And then all the other hogs were in the shed because it had gotten pretty cold, and they were in there and it just raising all kinds of hell, and they were squealing and everything. So Dad said, "Well, I got to go in there and find out what's going on." He was all by himself about 3 in the morning. And he walked in, and in the back of the barn, with all the hogs, there was a guy laying down, and he had passed out. And Dad says, "Hey, buddy, wake up. You're going to get hurt here. These hogs will get you, you know." And he said he couldn't bring the guy to. So he walked on back and drove out, and he went back to the neighbor that had called him about the hogs, and he says, "I want you to come and you hold the gun, and I'll see if I can get the guy up." And the neighbor, Carl Munson, says, "No, bud, this ain't a job for you and me.
It's a job for the police.
We're going to call the sheriff or the police." So Dad waited at the corner of the road between Munson Road and Highway 41 in case when the cops came. And when they came about like 5 or 6 cop cars.
Yeah, they never come one.
And so he, in the meantime, while he was waiting, somebody came walking across the field and tapped on Dad's window and said, "Hey, buddy," he said, "can I get? Do you have a light? I want to light my cigarette." And Dad looked at him, and all he had on was a T-shirt, and it had just turned
Oh
gold.
God!
And he remembered that the guy that was laying in there in the barn had all he had on was a T-shirt. So there was no way Dad was going to open the door or roll down the window. And so he says, "No," but he says, "You go on up down the road and go head toward Galesburg. I'm going to be going that way in about another 5 or 10 minutes. I'm supposed to be meeting somebody here, and I'll pick you up." So then when the sheriff...
that was actually pretty quick thinking.
Yeah. So the sheriffs all came, and Dad said, "Well, did you see him?" And the sheriff says, "See who?" And he says, "Well, the guy that had passed out in the shed
And killed my hogs.
and killed my hogs. He's walking up on 41, and you guys must have came right by him." Well, evidently the guy must have heard the cops.
Yeah,
and
spooked
he jumped off
him.
and got into the field where the police wouldn't see him. So anyway, it turns out that the guy had escaped from the research hospital.
Mental patient.
Mental patient, and he'd had a fit.
And it was like an epilepsy fit.
And he was able to kick 2 hogs to death.
Mm-hmm.
And this is possible.
Oh, yeah.
And so Dad has 2 dead hogs, and he called the insurance, and the insurance said, "Oh, we'll look into it." Well, they didn't. Research Hospital didn't want anything being let out.
They let somebody got out. Yeah.
Patients that escaped, so he couldn't get any money from them. But they must have paid off the insurance company, because they said, "We'll write it down as lightning, as 2 lightning strikes," and the hogs died from that. And Dad says, "It doesn't rain."
Yeah.
But
It was the middle of a drought.
Yeah.
They said, "Don't worry about that.
Yeah, right.
We got that covered."
Yeah.
So, and that was, and then after that, Dad had been gone a long time.
Oh God,
And
yes.
then she looked out and she could see
All the
kinds
cop cars.
lights going on and everything. So she had me, and my godson was also working there at the time. He was living with us, but Mike had been out all night. We couldn't get him up.
Yeah.
He
So
was drunk.
Mom and I went on up to the car, and we drive into the yard, and here's all 6
Oh God, yeah.
6
Cop cars.
cop cars, and Mom just about
Yeah,
lost her
right,
cookies.
right.
You know? And but every Dad was all right. There was
right.
had any problems. But the next day, when I got home from school and had my homework done and went out to go outside, I was actually I was scared for 2 or 3 days to go out, even into our own yard.
Of course, because your space had been invaded.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was be 3/4 of a mile from where
Right.
the incident occurred.
I better stop this here.